I'm Dr. Elizabeth Doherty. I'm the director of Holy H2O. You have Zoe Siegel from Greenbelt Alliance, our really great partner for the live streams, who's doing all the tech side of this, and really appreciate her work. I just want to start by acknowledging that, here, let me flip my phone around so you can see this beautiful place where I am. Here's Dimond Park along Sausal Creek, where there has been an amazing restoration project that you're going to learn about. I'm super psyched to learn more. And that's where we are today. Whoop. Uh, I just want to start by saying that Sausal Creek is part of the Weechin Ohlone territory. And we really are thankful to be in this territory and on this land today, learning about the history of Sausal Creek. We're going to be covering a lot of really important things, but I do want to start by saying that the Ohlone were here and are continue to be here, and we really acknowledge their presence in the past and continuing. One of the things that we do for these live streams is there's an opportunity to do something called paying a Shumi tax, which is like a land tax for the people that have taken over and colonized this area. And so for every live stream, we do a land tax donation. Well, it's a land tax to Segura Te Land Trust, which is an Ohlone group. And I highly recommend you look up Segura Te and you look up the Shumi, SHUMI land tax. These live streams are part of a big program that Holy H2O is doing with a host of different partners. Part of it are the live streams, and part of what we're doing is creating actual online walking tours where you'll be able to walk the creek, learn about creek history at different points, learn about the flora, and learn about the fauna. We've done lots of live streams along Temescal Creek in Point Melody, and we're working on the tour content right now for both Sausal and Temescal Creek. And the cool thing is once it's up, you'll be able to add your own content to it because it's a crowdsourcing opportunity. One of the things that when I was reading about the restoration in this park, one of the great lines was that I think it's the former director of Friends of Sausal Creek, Kimra McAfee, I think is her last name, was talking about when they were doing the restoration. She said, one of the things we're trying to learn is where to move things as the creek tells us where it wants to be. And I loved that idea of the creek being the boss of the project, and thinking about how much the restoration of habitat, which is probably the thing we need more than anything else on this planet right now, is habitat. And so we're going to start with Mark Rousen, who's a member of the board of Friends of Sausal Creek and also was a founding member. And he's got great history about how this park got started. We'll be talking to Kathleen, who's going to be talking about water quality and macroinvertebrates, and to Dee Rosario from East Bay Regional Parks about equity in the parks and access for all people to the parks and outdoor space. So Mark, are you ready?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks everybody for joining here. I want to reiterate what Elizabeth said. We're on Weechin Ohlone land, and I wanted to share with you this bowl that was found in the Fruitvale area from the former inhabitants here. And we honor this as a touchstone for our restoration for the people who came before us. And we realize that we are just a link in a long lineage of land caretakers. And we're very proud and to have the opportunity to take care of our own area in our own watershed. Let me put this down. And you know, a watershed is an area, if a raindrop's going to fall, it's going to fall this way or it's going to fall this way. And if it falls this way, this is on the ridge top, it's going to roll into Sausal Creek. And if it falls this way, it's going to roll over into Orinda and go out Grizzly Creek. So we're pleased to be able to offer our services to the Sausal Creek watershed that begins by the Chabot Space and Science Center. And it is a 2,656 acre watershed that flows basically along Fruitvale Avenue and encompasses 80,000 residents in our watershed. And in the olden days, a watershed would be a sufficient space to grow enough food and to have enough water to supply the inhabitants of that region. And so 80,000 might be crowding it a bit, but we are so fortunate that we have about 6 miles of creek to be able to tender. And the beautiful thing about our Sausal Creek is that much of the land is public land. So we're here in the beautiful Dimond Park at the city of Oakland. And then the city also has Joaquin Miller Park, which is where our headwater springs from. So we're very fortunate to have in this one small 3,000 acre parcel of land over 250 species of plants, over 200 species of birds. And just yesterday, a mountain lion was seen in the Shepherd Canyon branch of our watershed. So that just shows how healthy an urban watershed is in a highly dense urban area. And so we're really pleased to be able to be working to help increase the diversity of this. So I'm here at what we say is ground zero for the creek. In other words, this is where our restoration began. And it began with a bunch of neighbors in 1996 who were noticing that their area was a dumping ground, a unsafe place to take a hike. Only single males would be safe feeling in the watershed. And so we began here at a place we call the Demonstration Garden in Dimond. And Michael Filgen and I cut the stones and laid this stone circle as sort of a beginning spot for our efforts to restore the area. And what do we mean by restoring? Well, it was easy at first because the place was overgrown with acacia trees and eucalyptus, broom, and ivy. Algerian ivy has been the scourge. And so we wanted to make a garden to demonstrate what people could do in their own yards with native plants. And so this begat our effort to grow native plants. And so we have now a nursery in the hills on Sanborn Drive up by the Woodminster Amphitheater to grow our own local to the watershed plants. And we plant them in our restoration areas. And I swear we've planted over 10,000 plants over the years. And those years are almost numbering 25, but we've carved this stone teaching circle. And we have a number of these stone teaching circles throughout the watershed where education can be stressed, because that's what it's all about, is passing on the husbandry to the next generation. So we began here in, as I mentioned, pulling out weeds and planting, and this allowed us to begin to develop our education. And we've had school kids coming for all over many of the years, and we've also developed ways of restoring and then monitoring the restoration. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but I just want to make a point that the Friends of Sausal Creek is a community organization that is privileged to do the things that the city can't do and that the county can't do. You know, the city can only do so much, but they're limited by their budgets and their parameters. So we're very grateful to the County of Alameda for giving us a foundation grant every year. They give us enough money to keep going, and the city gives us labor and ways of disposing of trash, advertising, and helps us in our partnership with permitting these great projects. we're going to visit a couple other of the restoration places, but what we were so lucky to have had the opportunity was to uncover the creek where it was straitjacketed during the WPA in the 1930s. That was a make work project, and a lot of crap got dumped into the creek, cement, steel, and the creek was straitjacketed with cement, and we were able to liberate the creek. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit here. So maybe now would be a good time. Oh, maybe we could see my slides. Sorry.
Sure.
How's the time doing, Zoe?
You're good.
Okay, so our first slide basically shows the strip of watershed, sort of like a pizza here, a narrowing band and you saw hopefully last week when we were there at the mouth of the creek, you saw where the creek enters the Alameda Ship Canal. And now we're sort of midway above 580 where public land begins and where we really have a palette to use for creating a new vision, or as Kimbra McAfee says, a way of having the creek tell us what it wants to do. And that is such a intuitively sensible thing because really you can only plan so much. And you put a plant in a place, if it doesn't like it, it's not going to grow. So the world is always telling us what it wants and what opportunities there are. And so let's look at the next slide, please. We have had the opportunity to begin in the heart of Dimond Creek and Dimond Park. And here's a photo of the Scout Hut, which has been here since the early 30s. But this wall is adobe from the original Peralta Hacienda homestead that gave Peralta the Spanish land grants. And so next to it also is the mother oak, the diamond oak, or known as the champagne oak, which was sort of the heart and soul of Sausal Creek. Unfortunately, it got a disease and had to be cut down, but we still have the icon from it. And I want to share with you, this is another touchstone of the creek. Here is a cubit of the diamond oak. And I asked for this. We tried like heck to save it. I probably should have climbed the tree and been a tree sitter, but we ended up going with the city on this one. And here, what we got out of it was a historic tree registry. So now historic trees have a way of being saved by looking at their legacy. And this is our touchstone heartwood from the diamond oak that was here when grizzly bears were roaming, when Ohlone were roaming. And so we were fortunate to start our effort of restoring the creek just in the nick of time. And again, when the universe wanted it to be done. And so I'm walking here, I hope it's not making you seasick. Here is a sister tree. In other words, what I'm saying is these trees all started to die right when we started going. And here is the trunk of one of the giant oaks that made Oakland so great. Here's the remnants of a giant oak that fell near the tot lot. And again, this area has become so popular that the city cannot tolerate any fear of branches falling on people, liability issues. But here's, we just got started in time. Let me just say that. The trees were dying of senescence, and now we have gathered these acorns and are propagating these acorns. And this is, again, before sudden oak death changed our world. Let's see, the next slide, please. Can I see the next slide if that's possible? Yeah, so we began in 2001 to restore the entire, about a quarter of a mile of the canyon by stripping away all of the invasive vegetation. And this is what it looks like, a patient out of surgery wrapped in bandages. Next, please. The creek needed to have the sewer. I don't know if people know this, but sewer lines run through the base bottom of the creek because it's public accessible land. It's not in somebody's backyard where you need permission. So the creek sewer line was ceramic, and old earthquakes had cracked it. And the creek was disappearing into the ceramic sewer line. So it was going to be replaced by a plastic sewer line. And the city said, let's use the Friends of Sausal Creek to be a demonstration project of what we can do. So all of the WPA cement was removed. The creek was taken down to its original level bed. And then when it was done that, we found like fossil, not really quite fossils, but ancient tree roots of what the ancient forest used to look like. And then we began to restore it. And let's look at the next slide. With the plants that we grew in our nursery, and the creek was then allowed to reform over rocks that were placed here to keep it in its bed. Next slide, please. We were able to see a restored watershed with native riparian vegetation. And this then allowed us to begin to monitor how successful we were. And let's see if our next slide is about that. Oh yeah, and it couldn't be done without the thousands and thousands of volunteers of all ages. And let me just end here by saying, people really want to help. People feel a lack of connection to the land, and our project really elicits people's love of nature, the pent-up need to restore and help, and it is a beautiful thing to build a community around restoring a creek. So I think our next slide will set the stage. What we're going to be talking about now is monitoring. And I'm pleased to acknowledge my colleague, Kathleen Harris, who's done amazing work for the Friends of Sausal Creek in monitoring the water quality. I mean, what would a creek be without quality water and aquatic insects? So I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen now. I hope Kathleen is standing by to show us some aquatic insects down in the creek bed.
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Zoe. Mark, hi.
Hello.
So the creek is really low right now. It's almost November, and the bugs are all kind of in hiding down here in this section of the creek. But I have some photos. But first, let me talk about Healthy Creek watershed. So here's our little section of creek. This is below El Centro. So everyone knows that the purpose of a creek is to get rainwater from the watershed down to the ocean. Well, you can pretty much do that if the creek is pointed downhill. You can have a creek in a culvert, and it will do its job of getting the water from the watershed into the ocean. But the purpose of a healthy creek is to establish and maintain habitat. And to do that, a creek has to have a number of features: good geology, hydrology, water quality, and living organisms, plants and animals that can create and keep a home. So our drinking water is processed to make it safe so that it's healthy for us to drink. But if you took a baby trout and you plunked it in a bowl of tap water, well, it wouldn't do too well. You need to have the pH, the conductivity, the temperature within a range that is healthy for life. So you need to have just enough of some minerals and metal ions, but not more and not less. For instance, if you don't have any calcium in the water, you can't have snails because they're not able to pull the calcium from the creek to make their shells. And if you don't have snails, you don't have one of the big cleanup components of the creek, one of the organisms that does a job on algae and diatoms to remove that from the creek and turn that into other biomass. So we measure the attributes for water quality at 8 different sections of the creek, from up in the hills in Joaquin Miller Park all the way down to 27th and Fruitvale. This is the last publicly accessible place, this last publicly accessible section of the creek that is above ground. And we've produced a database covering pH, conductivity, temperature, and total dissolved solids for these sites for 8 years, and we intend to keep on going. We also collected coliform and E. coli samples, and what we found was, well, homeless encampments contribute to pollution, and there's a lot of point sources. So we decided that that wasn't worth pursuing. It wasn't giving us the kind of data that we needed. But so what we do is we use meter with a probe. We just up. It is calibrated before each use, and we measure pH, conductivity, temperature with the meter. We record it in a publicly accessible spreadsheet. So you can access this through Friends of Sausal Creek. But water quality doesn't tell you everything. Water quality can tell you if a trout lived there. It's the minimum requirement that you have a conductivity that's within a certain range, that you have a pH that's within a certain range, that you have a cool temperature. You need plants. You need trees and shrubs and water weeds and algae. A healthy creek in Northern California has a canopy of trees. So you could say that the creek extends all the way from down here in the bed of the creek down through the gravels and through the rocks where a lot of organisms live, all the way up to the canopy, because that canopy is sheltering the creek and making it cool. Okay, so a shady creek doesn't have much algae, except in places where the canopy is broken by storms or disease or development. So what happens here is the trees capture the energy of the sun, and they turn that into biomass. And the biomass here in this section of the creek is leaves that fall from the trees. The leaves fall in the creek and produce organic matter to support more plants. But leaves just don't disintegrate all by themselves. They take some work. And the establishment of habitat takes the participation of a diverse cast of interesting characters, the benthic macroinvertebrates. Benthic meaning bottom dwellers, macroinvertebrates because they're invertebrates that are just big enough for us to see with our eyes. They are not all insects. Some of them are flatworms. Some of them are snails. Some of them are scuds, which are little amphipods that are related to shrimp. But I'm going to call them all just bugs to make it easier. So you need a suite of these organisms to support habitat. You need bugs that break down the leaves, stoneflies. You need bugs that scrape diatoms and algae from the rocks, mayflies. You need bugs that can eat bacteria, filter feeders, like stonefly, like black fly larvae. You need predators to keep things under control and in balance. And you need bugs that can eat up the poop of the other things that live in the creek. There are no little flush toilets in the creek, but you're gonna, if you've got a bug that eats something, you're gonna need a detritivore to clean up after it. You can actually ascertain the health of a creek by looking at the bugs. There should be something in each niche. Now, the thing about a creek is that you've got maybe right here 10 different habitats spread out over what the bottom looks like, how much water flow there is, how much depth there is, whether there are tree roots, whether there's fallen vegetation, things like that. So the thing about a lake is that it's stratified according to depth. The thing about a creek is it's not stratified at all. It's just crazy. So you should you should find something in every niche and hopefully a couple of somethings for diversity. If a particular kind of bug is missing, that could indicate a particular type of pollution. So all of these, or most of the insects that are in the creek, are the juvenile forms. They are not winged. When they develop their wings, they emerge, they fly, they reproduce, and lay their eggs back in the creek or on vegetation near the creek. So if you don't have, if you have a lot of sediment pollution, the gills of these organisms are going to be affected, and you may see whole groups of organisms drop out because they don't have, because their gills are getting silted up. Okay, so collecting information about the kind and number of these bugs, the benthic macroinvertebrates, can give you a good idea as to what's going on in the creek. So let's talk about some of the bugs that we see here. Zoe, can I get the first slide?
There you go.
Okay. This is a flat-headed mayfly. This little guy maybe will get up to 1/2 inch, which is pretty big for a mayfly. They crawl, they're crawlers, and they're collector-gatherers. So they crawl around underneath the rocks, and they pick off little diatoms and bits of algae and detritus and bits of dead leaf, things like that. They're also one of the bunnies of the watershed. Lots of stuff eats mayflies. Okay, can I have the next slide? This beautiful insect is a stonefly. This particular stonefly is called a common stonefly, but we don't find them down here. This stonefly is very particular about what it likes. We find this stonefly up at Joaquin Miller Park, where the water is clearer and cooler and cleaner. But the stoneflies have a very, very important function. When leaves fall into the creek, they don't deteriorate by themselves. The stoneflies are called shredders. And what they do is they rip up the leaves, and then they sit around and they wait. And the leaves get colonized by bacteria, and they eat the bacteria. So this is very cool. But this common stonefly, this is just a real beauty. So that's why I put him in. Next, can I have the next slide? This is a little caddisfly. And the only caddisflies we see down here are very common caddisflies called microcema. This is a little Brachycentridae. And look at the little pieces of it has built itself a little case using silk to hold it together. And in fact, it's related distantly to the butterflies and moths, which also produce silk. So it has used little pieces of wood to make itself a house, and its delicate little gills can sit in there and be safe. So this is also one of those organisms that's seen mostly above Highway 13. So those are our 3 big insect groupings for a healthy creek. You want to see mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies. But you also want to see the next slide. This is a dragonfly nymph, and this is a predator. So the predators are going to help keep the creek in balance. So there's not a whole bunch of stuff that's then going to run out of food. And the nice thing about these dragonflies is they're voracious predators under the water. Then they emerge, their back splits open, the cuticle splits open, and they inch themselves out, spread their wings, and take off and become predators in the sky. Okay, and the next slide is also a very important member of the creek community. This is a black fly. This is a group of black fly larvae. And the black fly larvae are filter feeders. So they are converting bacteria into biomass, them, and then the trout or other insects or the trout come along and just can pop them off. They're very small, but they generally tend to be in groupings where they line up on the rocks and they direct their filter feeding apparatus, which comes out of it's part of the mouth parts in the head area, and they filter the creek water as it's flowing over these agglomerations. They filter out bacteria. So we can go back to the creek, just live. If we have a couple of each of these in our section of the creek, we say, hey, this looks pretty healthy. This looks pretty balanced. And in fact, when we look at this particular section of the creek, we routinely with classes find 8 or 9 different kinds of things. This is good. Hey, healthy creek. Yes.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Okay. We're coming back to Mark. And Mark is going to give us a little bit more about the history and I believe talk about the bird counts. But you'll tell me what you're talking.
Okay. I've relocated now to the trailhead at El Centro Avenue, and this is the Dimond Canyon Trail that's extremely popular for dog walkers and families. Here's the street and the parking, and here's a Black Lives Matter movement altar. And I want to point out this thing, maps. The Sausal Creek, the Friends of Sausal Creek has a map in every map box at every trailhead. And this map was made by another one of our stalwart volunteers, Karen Paulsell. And it's also on our website, but it shows the connectivity of Dimond Park, where we are, and as we move up Dimond Canyon to Highway 13. And now we're not going to get up to Highway 13 today, but this also is known as the Hayward Fault. So the Hayward Fault splits our watershed in basically a third, and we have the upper third in Joaquin Miller Park that drains the hills and then joins up with the second branch, Shepherd Canyon branch, and this is where the mountain lion was yesterday, and they come together at the golf course, the Monterey Golf Course driving range, and that's where Sausal Creek is really born, of Shepherd Canyon Creek and Palo Seco Creek. And now we're in this narrow canyon that's cut. And now this is what's so amazing about it, is that at Dimond Park, the hills converge with the flatlands and it opens up. And then that brings us back to the narrow part that narrowly drains through Fruitvale. So this is the very popular hiking trail that basically, if you knew where you wanted to go, you could go all the way to El Sobrante or Livermore if you followed these trails. Now, thanks to Kathleen for giving us this perspective, because one of the things we're really proud of is that we have the rainbow trout living, what, in Oakland? Yes, it's eating those macroinvertebrates. And because our water quality is cool and oxygenated and healthy, we have trout. And these trout weren't here in the early days. They started to arrive when the creek was finally restored here and water was allowed to flow all year long when the plastic sewer line was replaced. And that engendered this major restoration we had. And it's very different today than it was, because over the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of these giant oaks, which are missing from this picture, have fallen down. We've had a lot of tree death, a lot of wind throw. And here is, this is why it was so important that we got started when we did. These alders are dying, but we've put in the second generation alders that are now 5, 10 years old, and they're coming up. Here's a fence that was built by the Boy Scouts. And here's a hiker. Hi, hiker.
Hi.
I think if we were to put a counter here, there would be probably 200 people and 100 dogs go down this trail every year. So if I could have my, back to the slides for me, I just want to touch on the fact that in order to prove that our restoration is working, we monitor the sites. I wonder if you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you, Mark.
Okay, I was on my power recharge. Sorry. Now you can probably hear me better.
Yeah.
We've been monitoring here for at least 15 years because we want to demonstrate that, as Kathleen said, the canopy is part of the creek. And back in the day, they said it was the economy, stupid. It's the canopy, stupid. It's the canopy that provides the shade, but it also provides the insects for the bird life. And you can get a sense here that weeding is an endless job. And I should also state for the record that the Friends of Sausal Creek do not use herbicide. The city does not allow herbicide use on the city lands. So we're perpetually locked into weeding. And this is a thornless blackberry, which loves this. And when these trees fell, it allowed much more light in. So the blackberry is doing well, thank you. Over here is the scourge of the watershed. This is Algerian ivy. And even though we're in a drought, look at this stuff is very well, I guess it's living off of moisture in the air. And you see it's kind of everywhere. So we really are up against the battle of fighting weeds over what, 2,500 acres? That's kind of impossible. So I say it's the canopy. You plant these trees. Here's a redwood that a rogue gardener planted. We planted all of these willows in the 2001. So these willows are 20 years old. And we're hopefully holding on to the last of our oaks, but yet we're planting the next generation oak right here. So monitoring birds is a way of determining how successful our restoration is. And I think we can go back to that slide to see that we go out quarterly, and we've picked 9 sites from the headwaters to the bay. And we are looking at for 10 minutes at each site. So over the time, we've counted about 155 species, about 9,000 individual birds. And so what is important in ornithology and in monitoring is a long-term data set that mutes out all the variability. So let's see the next slide. We're just now getting to be a long-term set. And so one thing I looked at early on, a crunch of the data, and looking from the bottom to the top, for the first years of the restoration, we averaged 65 birds on our surveys. And then in the last decade, we've averaged 80 birds. So by removing the invasive hardy, the weeds, the algae, the ivy, the Algerian ivy, Algerian ivy does not equal algae, Mark. All the other weeds and trees, by making native plants, we've allowed the native birds to have a better go at it. And I think we can look at some data. Next slide, please. So we've made the world safe for song sparrows. I think that's a given. And I'm trying to listen here. I hear a chainsaw in the distance in a car. There should be a song sparrow here. Their populations vary up and down, up and down. But the trend is improving. Next slide, I think, is another bird of the undergrowth, the spotted towhee. And they are also up and down, but a trend line. Now, this brings up an interesting point for restorationists. We can't really only view birds as the measure of health. We also have to deal with human health. And speaking of human health, here is a disposed mast laying there. We're also worried about fire health. And these birds like dense brush. And guess what? The fire department does not like dense brush. So we've had to periodically address fire issues and pull the dense brush out. So that removes some of their habitat. And that, to some degree, it looks like their populations have declined a little bit since our early restoration, when everything was brush, before the canopy evolved and grew to provide shade. And our next slide, I think, is something we all can relate to. What's with these crows, man? When I first moved to the Bay Area, there were no crows here. And this shows their look at that flat line in the first 7, 8 years. And then suddenly out of nowhere, these crows took over. And the bad news is crows eat baby birds. Baby jays eat baby songbirds. So the crows are also learning to take advantage of human waste. And back in Dimond Park, there used to be a feral cat colony, and that was basically feeding the crows and the ravens when the cats weren't there. And so then that was turned against the little native birds when you have 3 now fortified predators ganging up for these wild birds who are scraping a living from the leaves and roots. So we continue our monitoring, and when we have 25 years, we'll sit down and do a big full survey. Now, I'm going to be wrapping up soon, but I just want to show you, don't you want to know where that trail goes? This would lead up to a place not far from here where we've just completed a 2019 effort to remove sedimentation from the creek. And that sedimentation was coming out of storm drains that were just directly taking water off the street and just hosing it onto the creek hillsides. And that sedimentation was eroding the hillsides, making homes unsafe, but layering the creek bed with fine siltation. And that would get in the gills of the trout, but also the gills of the aquatic insects that Kathleen was telling us about. So it was a deterioration of the integrity of the whole food web from the ground up. And so we were able to get well, I think it was what, $750,000 grant to pass through to allow people, specialists, engineers to come in and fix those leaking pipes or break the water flow with rocks, allow the water to flow naturally, slowly, and to remove the sediment. So again, this is what the Friends can do that the city and county can't do. We can bring people together and pass through the money and coordinate. So I don't want to take up more time. I think we have a very interesting conversation coming up with Dee Rosario. So let's go and see what Dee's up to.
All right. Thank you so much.
Before we go to Dee, Mark, are you still by that altar in the park?
Yes.
Would you just flash a picture of that and Zoe let Mark show that? Because I think that's an awesome lead in to Dee Rosario, yes, who's going to be talking about equity in the park. And there's this beautiful altar that got set up very soon after George Floyd was murdered.
Breonna
and
Taylor.
This is a Black Lives Matter. And when I walked by this on a trail walk one day, of course, it brought tears to my eyes. So appreciative that people brought this altar into the park zone. So Dee, I think you'll probably
Totally
have a lot to say
spontaneously.
about this. Yeah, totally
Uh-huh.
spontaneously. So great.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Okay,
Great.
Dee,
Thank you.
take it away.
Great, thank you. Great presentation, everyone. And just a short introduction to myself. I'm Dee Rosario. I'm on the board of directors for the East Bay Regional Park District, and I represent a good portion of Oakland. And prior to my being on the board, I was a park ranger and firefighter for the East Bay Regional Park District for 37 years. And then just prior to retiring in 2013, I was a supervisor of Redwood Regional Park, which is now Reinhardt Redwood Regional Park, for the last 17 years of my career. But what I'd like to do is, can I share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Here we go. I'd like to start off. I really appreciate the acknowledgement of the Huichin peoples that were our first stewards. This is a map of that's on the East Bay Regional Park District website. We've developed a curriculum around certified for third graders, and it's on our website, and it teaches about the Ohlone in the Bay Area. And this is one of the maps, and you can see. I don't know if you can see my cursor there, right around the bay, the Huichin, pretty much Bay Area, all the way up north to Richmond. And I just want to acknowledge their presence, their stewardship of the land, and the stewardship that we now have inherited, and we are continuing to learn from their practices. They learn to live with. They realized, I'm sure, quite early that the Bay Area is fire dependent, and they used fire for in their management of the land, and we are just starting to learn that ourselves, how to live with it and how to use it. And just as my next slide is just a reminder of the park district and how big we are. As you can see, we are now at we have 73 parks, 123,000 acres, approximately 1,200 miles of trail, and 55 miles of shoreline. And one of the things I want to talk about is that access to our parks is a priority for the park district and for the health of our community. And even though we have 73 parks, not everyone can get access to our parks. We just recently concluded a survey where the majority of people that get to our parks get there by car. And so, as you can see, a lot of our inland parks along the Bay Ridge Trail, they're all interior, very hard to get to. Even now with COVID, it's even more, we've lost the possibility of public transportation. And so it's really, really important that we try to connect some of our parks. I think the big solution for us is to consider connecting all of our regional parks with our existing city parks. And I think the reason why this talk here is so ties in perfectly is that Dimond Park is a perfect example of a community park that connects community to a city park, which is Dimond Park, Joaquin Miller, and then it connects to Reinhardt Redwood Regional Park and the Ridge Trails, 29 miles of Ridge Trail, which is accessible, and you can get there by foot. And ideally, we need to talk about getting our young kids or people of color who are mostly in these communities along the shoreline access to those parks. But at the same time, in order to get to introduce them to introduction into what the wildland is, we need to develop parks along the shoreline in their own neighborhoods. And to that, I think the Bay Trail along the shoreline has been one of my predecessor, Judge John Sutter, and myself and my colleagues on the board. Also, the Bay Trail, developing the Bay Trail, and making those connections is a huge priority, so that we can connect all these neighborhoods, and which mostly are underserved, so that they can get to the shoreline and at least have an introduction to parks. And then from there, we'd like to see parks connect from there from the shoreline, from the water to the hills. And like I said, Dimond Park is a perfect example of that. And currently we are trying to, we're working with Alameda County Flood Control and the Friends of San Leandro Creek. We're extending the San Leandro Creek from Martin Luther King eastward into 4 more new neighborhoods. We're going from Hagenberger all the way to 98th, and the dream is to make that connection all the way to Lake Chabot. And then we're also developing, in terms of expanding the Bay Trail, the Park District has acquired from the Army Corps of Engineers. We now own the channel in the estuary on the Oakland side, and we're looking to extend the Bay Trail on that side. And we're working with the City of Oakland, the U.S. Coast Guard, Alameda County, to get trails, make a connection underneath the Park and High Street bridges. And from there, we'll have almost a contiguous trail to connect with the newly opened Judge John Sutter Regional Park. These connections are vital to our communities and our communities of color. They are underserved because a lot of them were pushed to the shorelines. And as we're seeing with COVID, we definitely people need that connection to nature. And I think as a union member in my 37 years with the Park District, workforce diversity was always something a goal that we were striving for. And I think with the Black Lives movement, it's accelerated and accentuated that process. So the Park District has now is putting up that mirror to itself and looking at our own systemic racism within our own structure. We've just started our district-wide for our employees implicit bias training, so that we're all on the same page, so that we can go forward from there. And we're looking to, from there, we'll be looking at our hiring and promotional practices, so that we can actually reflect the community that we serve. And I think one of the things that Mark brought up is that people that of color that want to come to our parks, there's a fear factor, a safety factor. And I think one of the things that will help address that is if the workers in those parks look like them, if the people that use the parks look like them. And I think the Park District has programs that are outreaching and been quite successful, but they're small bits. And we have a Healthy Parks, Healthy People program where we're actually getting doctors to do prescriptions for the outdoors. And we're actually providing, at the time prior to COVID, we were actually providing transportation to the doctors would write the prescription. We would meet them on a particular day, and we would take them to their nearest parks. We also do a community outreach with our community wellness walks, where we take our last one was taking the community from Richmond. We work with faith groups and community groups, and we took them out to Sausal, and we've done that. We've had I'd say 40 or 50 of those trips throughout the park district along the shoreline, getting people out to parks where they wouldn't normally get to see. And we've also, in 2019, we provided 40,000 school children in our underserved communities the opportunity to get a bus and get a naturalist-led program at a park they would not, again, not ordinarily get a chance to see. But we need to engage our young people. And I think, again, the Friends of Sausal Creek is a leader in this, I think, in that you need to engage people in the development of their parks. And I've had the pleasure of helping with Friends of Sausal Creek. I lead the trail maintenance crew, and I take on whatever I can get. And this is a build on crew from 2014, and these kids this is their, and oftentimes their first introduction to the wild, and then and a lot of times it's the first time that they understand what it takes to actually maintain a trail. What is a trail? What it takes to maintain a trail. So, you know, there are no trail fairies out there. People, it's hard work, and I'm hoping that some of these young folks will think of it as a possible career, and because there's plenty to do out there. And then yeah, you know, as a person of color, I'm the first Filipino American on the board of directors. That's another area where once we develop an interest in the young people, and then we can show that people that look like them can rise up and become leaders themselves, I think that goes a long way towards inspiring people to think of nature and having a career in nature, but also just a sense of self-worth, and the fact that if there are people like them in places of power and providing safety in parks, I think it goes a long way to equity. But it's just, like I said, all the environmental organizations are in the same boat. They're all looking, putting that mirror of systemic racism, looking at it in that lens, looking at themselves, and then going out and hoping and just starting the education and starting with our young people. And I think it's extremely important. Like I said, people need parks need people. And with that, I think I will end. I just thought, slide from the Oakland Museum that shows historic creeks in the Oakland area that we have here. It would be great if we could develop creek to hills connections in all those. And I think Sausal Creek is to be admired and modeled after. I think they've done a great job, and they do a great service to the community. Lots of lessons to learn there for other communities. And with that, I will end my talk. And I appreciate.
Dee, thank you so much for that. Zoe, if you can switch back to my camera, I just have to show you, speaking of kids in the watershed, I just want to, can you see? Yeah, there you go. Zoe, if you could put my screen on the main screen. Dee, I think you might have to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to get on there. Let's see.
Okay, there we go. Whoops. There we go. Here's a big parade coming through the park of all the kids in their Halloween costume. Every time I come to this park, it's just loaded with kids, often in the creek itself, learning about bugs and birds. But I love that they have a safe place to come to during COVID to celebrate. And what Dee, here, let me switch this around. What Dee just said about people in the park that look like them. one of the things that we're doing is building a curriculum for teachers in the Bay Area to use the watershed tours. I have interns working on that right now. And that is a big part of it, is we want their history to be told in the watersheds, not just the white history, not just who built what and what organizations they started. And I'm not talking about Friends of Sausal Creek, I'm talking about way back in history. But also, we want people to have their own history. We want Chinese folks to know what happened at Lake Temescal. We want Ohlone children to know where their major sweat lodges were built along creeks. We want African American kids to know it is safe to come into the parks, even though they have been excluded intentionally for a long period of time up until the last 30 years or so. So I assume that there might be some questions, but I did want to just put that in there. And I so appreciate all the speakers. It's an honor to kind of host these speakers. I feel like one of those people out on the, the wilds of Africa, tours. And now we have biologist so-and-so, and it's just amazing to me. Do we have any questions from you all who are here listening? Zoe, do you see any in the chat?
I do not see any in the chat.
Okay. Well, if you all don't have questions, then we'll say thank you for attending. We always put these up on our YouTube page. And as I said, we're building a curriculum and a walking tour where you'll be able to access all of these. So send them on to your friends if they missed it, but would love to be a part of knowing more about Sausal Creek. Thanks so much from you all. I just can't tell you how great it is to have you all come and pay attention to what we're doing here. It's really beautiful. Thanks so very much. And support Friends of Sausal Creek. They are doing phenomenal work, as you can see. Okay, I mean, support us too. We need it to do these live streams. But if you're around this area, really get involved. They always can use volunteers. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much to Dee, Mark, and Kathleen for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All
It's a
right.
pleasure.
Have a great rest of your
We'll send out the link in a follow-up email and stuff. You'll hear from us.
Yes, you will. All right. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.